Hey there, everybody. Keith Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of In the Prog Seat. It's Tuesday night. Welcome, everybody, to the channel and to All Things Prog here. We've got a pretty interesting show for you tonight. And let me introduce to you before I divulge the theme. We've got from Chicago, our 1-2 punch of Louis Nasser and George Lemay. From Pennsylvania, our center square tonight, Anthony Ferrara. All the way from Scotland, Mr. Stephen Reed from the UK Connection. My fellow New Yorker, we've got Eric Porter and the professor of Prague, also from New Jersey, Mr. Ken Golden. Greetings, how's everybody doing?
All right.
Good.
So
Good
today's
evening,
theme and next week's, because this will be a two-parter, is we decided to take, this was a recommendation from one of our viewers. And this theme is basically, oops, and we lost someone.
Stephen, I thought he was frozen there for a minute. Yeah,
Oh,
we lost Stephen.
okay. Well, he'll jump back on in a second. Basically, what this is, we're looking at some of the major prog bands, historically the big ones, and throughout most of their careers, they had at least one, in some cases more than one, album which was kind of like maybe really underrated to a lot of the fans, or maybe misunderstood by fans and critics alike, or maybe these albums just suck. I don't know. That's the kind of the question we're asking ourselves here. So the albums in question are Yes, Tormato, Rush, Caress of Steel, King Crimson Islands, and Gentle Giant Civilian. So are they criminally underrated? Are they just kind of misunderstood? Or do they just simply suck? So I'm going to have everybody we'll go album by album. Everybody will kind of give their 2 cents on what they think of these albums. Are they better than a lot of people say they are? Are they not as good as some people say they are? Or are they really just terrible? Are they completely misunderstood, and why? So Louis, I'll have you kick us off. We'll start with Tormato first.
Tormato. Okay. All right. Full disclosure here. I am not, as people know, the greatest Yes fan. However, I will say that Tormato, in spite of the cover, which might make you think that even they thought it wasn't that great, considering that they're being tomatoed right in the crotch, right? It's I think that it has some really interesting songs, and it has some pretty excellent bass work, especially the Silent Wings of Freedom. I love Chris Squires playing on that song. I actually like the record quite a bit. I don't mind Don't Kill the Whale for some reason, and Madrigal is good. Arriving UFO, you see, to me, this is a record that illustrated a lot of the difficulties these guys were having with coming up with ideas around that time. To me, I think a lot of the really, really great things about their arrangements and their old compositions are still there. Wakeman is there, right? But I don't think that they're all moving in the same direction, and I think that has been true ever since, really. As we can see from all the things that have happened. So is it a crap record? I don't think so. I don't think it's a crap record, but I don't think it's anywhere close to their best records. Is it misunderstood? I don't think there is that much to understand. It's yes. There's nothing very deep going on. Some of the music is very, very, very good, and but it's not a puzzle to solve. It's not a challenging listen. I don't think. I think maybe the controversy is that it signaled a band that was no longer as popular as it once was, and there were a lot of within the band at the time. More than anything, that would be what I would imagine would be a controversy there. I own it.
Luis, can I interject one thing?
Please do.
I saw them on that tour. They sold out 5 nights at Madison Square Garden. So in terms of popularity, their fan base, they were wildly popular in
Of course, but
1971.
nobody wanted to go to this. I would imagine they wanted to go to Square Garden to hear them play that new record.
No, and
That's
they
kind of
wanted to see. They wanted to see Yes, you know. So
yeah. So of course, Yes was famous for a good reason, but that record is not. You know, how many of these songs do they play live nowadays? Well, whichever incarnation or whatever it is you call Yes. And I think that's kind of the crux of my argument. I think that the record is not terrible, but it's not, you know, it's not their best work for sure. And but even a guy like me who owns it, you know, and I do play it once every couple of years. It's not terrible. It's just not, you know, it doesn't set my imagination on fire like Close to the Edge or Relayer, right? It's just not that. So that would be my view on Tormato. I don't think it's misunderstood. I don't think like I said, I don't think there's anything to misunderstand.
Yeah, and probably in saying that it's not really misunderstood. It's not really underrated, and it doesn't suck, right? So it's kind of maybe it's one of those mediocre albums. It's good, right? It's I don't know.
I mean, let's be honest. We've talked about this before. The dedicated Yes fan will buy a dead cat with a Yes logo. It doesn't matter, right? And to the rest of the people, if you want to get them into Yes, that's not the record you reach for, right?
True.
I think those two things are true. So yeah, it's exactly as you said. It doesn't suck, but it's not going to win over new converts either, right?
Yeah. Anthony, what's your take on Tormato?
I love it. I adore it. Except for I think Arriving UFO is kind of goofy, but the opening track, Future Times Rejoice, kicks ass. Don't Kill the Whale kicks ass. Madagirl is such a beautiful tune, but it's too short. Like Rush's Madagirl, they're both too short. I think there's beautiful songs. Onward, which was written by Chris Squire, is very emotional. When I saw the band in 2008 with what the heck's his name? With Oliver Wakeman on keys, and who was the singer at the time? Do you remember, Pete? I'm not brain freeze.
Benoit
David.
Yeah.
Benoit David. When I saw them, they played Onward, and I was blown away that they played it because I think they said they hadn't played it in years. So that was pretty cool. On the Silent Wings of Freedom, Chris Squire, bass bliss, fantastic. I also think Release is fantastic. Great bass in that. Squire with the fantastic background harmony vocals with John. I think it's a great record. I think it's underrated because I think in the Yes canon, a lot of Yes fans kind of put it down because of the cover. I think they think Arriving UFO is goofy as hell, which I agree, but I think it's underrated. I think it's fantastic. And when it comes to live stuff, I saw John Anderson with the School of Rock last August, and they played Don't Kill the Whale, so that was pretty awesome. So I love it. Underrated.
Okay, cool. All right, that's good. Excellent. Eric.
Well, I tried to think about this in terms of how I got introduced to Yes, and outside of the stuff you heard on the radio, round about the popular stuff. The person who introduced me to Yes, and I think Lewis or Anthony just said this, it was like, here's Close to the Edge, here's Fragile, go listen. And I don't think anything on this album measures up to those albums. There's good songs. The opening track is great. Future Times, Don't Kill the Whale is okay. I just find it to be a very mediocre album. When you get to Release, from there, I think it goes severely downhill. I do not like the second half of this record at all. I'm sorry. Circus of Heaven, Onward, I find boring. Arriving UFO, I just don't like at all. So to me, and I love drama, so that's kind of mine. Like drama's the one that stands out to me. Is I love drama, and I know drama's a pretty underrated record. At least to me, it's an underrated record in their catalog. But this, to me, it's extremely mediocre. Yes, and I don't want to listen to mediocre. Yes, so that's my take on Tormato.
So we got to suck, I guess, here. Okay.
I think we had a bad connection. I think I heard Eric say the second half of the album wasn't good. I think there must be something wrong with his connection.
I want to clarify. I forgot that this is where they have Circus of Heaven. Holy shit! What that is a terrible song.
That's
My
a shit
God.
eater. That song's a real shit
Oh
eater.
my God, that makes the other UFO thing seem like Slayer in comparison. My God. No, I forgot. All right, I'm revising my opinion. Yeah, that's not a very good record. That puts down the average. I'm sorry. Yes.
Well, I get, it's kind of, Lewis, you said this on one of the episodes. It's got all the ingredients for yes, but the cake does not taste nearly as good. That's the only way I can look at it. And there's so many good yes records. I'm not going to put this one on. I haven't played this one in years. I went back and listened, for the show. I don't think I'll pull it out again.
All right. George.
Well, I had to go and look and see how this record is received. It's the only one in the 70s besides the debut that was getting below 3-star average on Rate Your Music. So people dislike it. I would say it's better than that. I like it better than the debut. I actually find it an easier listen than Going for the One. Actually, I never really cared for that album. And I find it just as good as Time and a Word. So I'm probably rating it higher than most people. But that said, like Eric said, when I reach for yes, am I putting it on? No, probably not. I think this record, sometimes people know too much. And why this is ranked low is because of all the stories about the time in the studio and this album broke the band up and all that stuff. People can't unknow that. So they instantly go into it with that thought, like this album was a disaster and Rick Wakeman hates it. He's on the record as hating it. And I don't think you can unknow that stuff. So I think that plays into it, because if you just listen to it, yeah, it's not exceptional, but it's not a shit eater either. I mean, it's no obvious, horrible album like some of the later stuff kind of is. So for me, I'd say maybe a little misunderstood.
Ken.
I like the album. I'm not wild about the album, but to me, it was kind of an extension of Going for the One, in a sense. Going for the One, I thought, was a much stronger album. The material is much stronger. And also, for parts of Going for the One, like Awaken, some of those pieces were older pieces. So the real problem with Tormato, for me, is the production. The production on the album sucks. And I think it robbed the band of power. It's a very thin sounding album. Wakeman was experimenting with the Birotron, which was like supposed to replace the Mellotron instead of using use tapes, but I think on 8-track, basically like an 8-track cartridge. So it was an experimental keyboard that he was investing in and playing around with. It sounded like crap. He was using these early polyphonic synthesizers that sounded like crap. You weren't hearing the Hammond organ, the Mini Moog, things like that, and the songs themselves, it was like an attempt, it was like a conscious effort to make a more commercially viable album. I remember 1978. I mean, who was doing prog albums in 1978? So I think on that level, I think it kind of succeeded. It was a progressive rock album, but it was a little bit more digestible. You could kind of hear in terms of cohesiveness, the band was kind of running out of, they were kind of running on fumes at that point. But I think those were really good songs. On the Silent Wings of Freedom, I think is great. And also I should say that having seen them so many times back then, I could tell you that all of the material, even stuff like Arriving UFO, was much better live than it is on the record. And that kind of goes back to the really weak production. If Eddie Offord was there, I think it would have sounded much better.
100%.
And if they would have stuck to what they knew, I think in terms of the tonal palette, I think it would have been much more successful. Circus of Heaven is the worst song they've ever recorded. When we did the show on Shit Eaters, that was one of mine. I hate that song. I think it's embarrassing, but I thought Onward was a very, very nice song, beautiful song. I like Future Times, Rejoice, and Magical. Arriving UFO was kind of goofy. Release wasn't bad. It had some good parts, but I hate when there was this overdubbed applause in the middle of the song.
That drum solo and the pause.
Yeah. It's not their best album, but we're going to be talking about a bunch of albums tonight, and I got to say, of this is far from the worst of the ones we're going to be discussing. So yeah, it's it's not. I never put it in my sell pile. Let's put it that way. Not a record that I listen to often. I listened to it this weekend. I listened to it more than I have probably in the last 20 years. But overall, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, a lot of good points here, and I agree with everybody for the most part, and I don't think it's a terrible album. Is it a little misunderstood? Perhaps. Is it a little bit underrated? Perhaps. I don't think it sucks. There's some sucky material on it for sure. I will 100% agree with Ken that I think the production is awful. And I think if Eddie Offord was on board here, and Wakeman's keyboard sounds are just atrocious on this album. And I really haven't loved a lot of Wakeman's keyboard sounds on a lot of things he's done over the last 30 plus years. It's almost to me like the early and mid 70s Wakeman, what he was playing, what he was using is peak. And I haven't been on board with a lot of what he's done after that. That being said, there are some great tracks on here. On the Silent Wings of Freedom is top shelf, yes. Onward, gorgeous. Future Times and Rejoice, gorgeous. I like Don't Kill the Whale. Release is fun. Yeah, there's a couple shitty ones on here too, but and the cover sucks, right? I mean, it sounds like a band that weren't on the same page anymore, but I listen to this more than I listen to Topographic Oceans, to be honest with you, even though I think that's a much better album, but this is more listenable to me. And it doesn't quite hold a candle to Going for the One, which I like a lot. And, but this is way better than anything they've done post 90125, in my opinion. I have a hard time with almost every album they've done after that album. So yeah, for me, maybe a little underrated, doesn't quite suck. So I'm kind of like in the middle on this one. I like it. I don't love it, but it's not awful by any means. So,
Pete, but I don't know if you remember, but I said something a few weeks back. We were talking about Keith Emerson, where Emerson and Wakeman, the same thing. They started changing their keyboard sounds. With Emerson, it was with Works. He got in, heavily invested in that Yamaha GX1. Sounded like crap. Abandoned the Hammond, abandoned the Mini Moog, and it really changed. Again, it changed his tonal palette, and it changed the way Keith Emerson sounds. And with Wakeman, it's the same exact thing. All of a sudden, the sounds that you were expecting and familiar with, they were gone.
Yep, gone. And it limits your enjoyment of the material.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And I think
that's a very good observation, because you really are kind of playing a different instrument.
Yeah.
So you have to, it's like with pedals. Sometimes you have to play to the pedal. And if you try to force certain things or shapes onto a sound, they just don't fit.
Yeah.
I think that's actually very true.
These guys were such advanced players. They wanted to use the latest technology at their disposal. Unfortunately, these were early attempts at polyphonic synthesizers, and they just don't sound very good, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. And not to derail the conversation, but the band we're going to talk about next had the same issue in the 80s with their guitarist and changing the guitars he used, the effects he used. I'm talking about Rush, Alex Lifeson, right? So a lot of people have issues with some of those 80s Rush albums because the guitar sound is so drastically different, right? So, but anyway, that's a discussion for another day. But Rush is our next album. Caress of Steel. Classic or crap, right? We all know this history here. The band released this album. Nobody bought it. The record label hated it. They told them, if you don't get a hit album on your next one, you're off the label. And they basically went out and did 2112, which ain't a hell of a lot different than this, but that sold gazillions. Everybody loves it. And people look at this as one of the worst albums in their career. Lewis, criminally underrated, misunderstood, or does the Caress of Steel absolutely suck ass? Oh, you're on mute.
I don't think that it's as bad as people say. In fact, you said it yourself. Without Caress of Steel, there wouldn't be 2112. That was the stepping stone. They were trying to be hyper prog, right? They were really wearing their yes on influences in a way, right? All these multi-titled things, and I like that record. I mean, I don't really understand why people slag it so bad. To me, again, are you listening to the record that you have in front of you, and reacting to that, or are you reacting to the fact that you are not hearing the thing you wish they had made? Because those are two separate things, right? And if you just listen to the record that they did make, they were young, whatever, but there's some really good ideas, and there's some really good stuff happening all over that record. I have a hard time shitting on any of it, whereas, and then, the pressure of the rejection was the crucible that finally made that Rush Diamond work, right? So I don't hate it, far from it. That's a record I listen to as frequently as I listen to any other Rush album. I don't have any, and I don't have anything bad to say about it. I actually like it quite a bit. I like the fact that they just decided to make a side-long called The Fountain of Lamneth. I don't even know what the fuck that means, but it doesn't matter. It's good, and I enjoy it. I enjoy the grapes it takes to do that with a more muscular sound. They weren't really, you don't really hear the fairies dancing in the background. It's a different sort of take. And I enjoy that. And I mean, it's got Neil Peart drumming. Come on, right? That already is a game changer, right? I've always said this: a bad Rush record is better than most people's best material.
Yep.
So, what am I going to do? Say bad things about it? No. Is it misunderstood? I think so. I think I think people still didn't really understand Rush at all, in fact, at that time. I think they themselves are trying to figure themselves out, right? They were trying to find the sound that became 2112 and then became the rest of their lives, that identity. So I don't fault them for that. They were always trying new things, and every record always sounds like they are playing and singing at the absolute limit of their capabilities, right? They are not mediocre. They push themselves to the edge every time for years at the beginning, right? It always has that tension, like the wheels are about to fall off, and I like it, So I don't have anything bad to say. I love that record.
Cool.
I don't think it sucks at all.
Anthony.
All right, 1975. Rush releases Caress of Steel towards the end of 1975. I remember watching in the documentary from 2010 where Alex Lifeson was talking about how he played the album for Paul Stanley, and Paul Stanley looked at him and said, "What is this shit?" And I'm thinking, "Oh God." But I don't know if I call it underrated, but it's another one of those albums that has a goofy tune like Yes, I Think I'm Going Bald. It's a goofy tune, and I guess at the time, Alex was paranoid about always asking Geddy, look at my hair, am I going bald? So I guess ended up writing a tune about it. But, you have the two suites, the Necromancer on your earphones is just, it's prog heaven. It really is. You just put them on, and it just takes you away. You turn the lights off. And the other suite, Fountain of Lament, one of my favorite tracks in the suite, Known at the Bridge, is one of my all-time favorite Alex Lifeson guitar solos. I think the tone on this album, I mean, it's just heavy, and it's just raunchy and crunchy. Like, I don't think Alex ever sounded. I think his guitar tone in this is fantastic. And I love the opener, Bastille Day, and Lakeside Park, beautiful tune. Got to see it live on the 40th anniversary. Geddy, with his vocal capabilities, didn't hit it like we thought, but it's still a great tune. So I'm going to say it's underrated in the catalog, because a lot of people, maybe after 2112 and Hemispheres and all the 80s Gen X's came back and thought, oh, this is a great record, but I guess at the time it didn't sell well. I remember Geddy saying they were playing like to nobody in the concert halls. It was getting bad. That's why they needed to have the next record be huge. So I'm gonna go. It's underrated. I think it's fantastic. I love Alex's tone on this, and as Luis says, it's got Neil Peart, so it can't be bad.
Cool. Eric.
I got the old archives,
I remember that. Wow.
and
I had that too.
I guess the way I looked at this again, it's kind of like with Yes. I came into Rush really big because Moving Pictures was probably the biggest album when I was in high school. Everybody had it, everybody listened to it. And outside of the few songs that I might have heard on the radio, that's the album that turned me on to Rush. And I worked my way backwards. And to me, this album, this is one of those albums I think, and you guys have pointed out with 2112 was kind of the make or break. But I do think 2112 is a much better written album. And you have to go through, they had Neil for Fly By Night, and you're kind of going through figuring each other out. What are we going to do? Neil became the lyricist. They're obviously writing much more complex material than they did on the first record. I love Bastille Day. I think I'm going bald. Again, just kind of silly, doesn't really do anything for me. Lakeside Park to me sounds like the Doobie Brothers. Shoot an arrow at me, I know, but I just don't, to me, that doesn't sound like a Rush song. The Necromancer, the narration to me is dopey. I'll be the first to admit that I'm not a lyrics guy, so maybe Neil wrote something fantastic, but in terms of the song, it really doesn't do anything for me. And Fountain of Lamneth, it's too choppy. Like all of a sudden it stops, and then something, it's pieced together, but I don't think it's cohesive at all. I agree with Anthony. I do like the solo section of Lifeson. It's a great solo spot, but that album that song just kind of goes, here's 2 minutes, stop, here's 4 minutes, here's something. It doesn't work for me in terms of a piece of music. There's some interesting things in there, but I don't think it compares to 2112. I think 2112 is much better written musically. So I hate to go with the popular vote, but it's an album, I just don't play it. And I went back and listened to it a lot for this show and don't care if I hear it again, to be honest with you.
George.
Eric's the hater tonight.
Yeah. The axe is coming down twice in a row. Woo. What about you, George?
Again, I went and looked back and to see how people are rating this, because if you just read comment sections, you'd think that people hate this album. A lot of people pick it last and they bag on it all the time. But looking at the ratings, it's kind of I think it's rated fair. It's rated one of the lesser albums of the 70s. It is for me. And it's rated lower than the albums that I like afterwards, the early 80s, stuff like that. Yeah, you got a point that it's very in the same vein as 2112, but like Eric said, it's not as well done, I don't think. I like the first 3 songs, and I think Necromancer and Lamnath are patchy. There's parts I like a lot, but it just doesn't hang together like the stuff on 2112. It's like an embryonic version of that. Me personally, I think a lot of the heat this album takes is from I Think I'm Going Bald, which that is unfair. That sounds, that's just as good as any song on the debut, and nobody bags on that. I mean, it's a pretty solid metal tune. I don't know. It's a decent tune just because the lyrics are a little goofy. I'd always heard it was in response, kind of like a play on when Kiss did Going Blind, because they had toured with them, Going Bald, Going Blind. I don't know if it's true or not.
I heard it was Kim Mitchell. They kind of threw it at him, but I don't know if that's true or not either. So
lots of stories.
Right.
I don't know. For me, I like this album okay, but honestly, I never made the transition when I went from vinyl to CD. I never got it on CD. And I'm kind of fine with that because the songs that I really like are on the live albums, and I think it's rated fairly. It's a lesser Rush album, but if you're going to say it's one of the worst, I disagree with that. But I don't think a lot of people really say that. It's just a handful of loudmouths.
Ken, how about you?
I'm digging all the hatred tonight. It's great. You know, I am I'm the acknowledged Rush novice. It's not like they're unknown to me. You know, I own Rush albums, but I don't go deep into the catalog. This one actually I had to do a little digging, and I should give you my philosophy of Rush. I see three phases of Rush. You have the early hard rock phase, basically the first three albums. You get the progressive phase, for me, by far their best stuff. And then there's the third phase, and that's the one where the label A&R guy called and he said to the guys in the band, he said, "Hey, look, the Police broke up and we have a job opening. And I don't know if you guys want to take it, but you know, it could be very lucrative." And they went for it. So I went back and I really listened to Caress of Steel a lot since last week. And it's a transitional album. You know, it's the progressive influences are more and more. I didn't think it was a bad album. I saw it as like a glimpse into the future of better things to come. I thought Bastille Day was a pretty good opener. You know, I Think I'm Going Bald was horrible. I think it was just a dumb song. But a lot of bands were famous for dumb songs. Lakeside Park, I hated it at first. It was very poppy, but I kept hearing it and it was stuck in my head all weekend. So I kind of like it now. It's like, it's okay. You know, it's all right. I thought the Necromancer was a very good song. And that really was like a foreshadowing of what you would hear on 2112. Fountain of Lambeth, it's too long. You know, it's rare for me to say that because I'm always into like the sidelong track. I thought it was okay. It, you know, like Eric was saying, it doesn't really have good flow to it. I didn't really. George is shaking his head. I don't understand why. You agree with me or disagree with me?
I agree, no flow.
Yeah, and you know, Neil is great. I don't need to hear a drum solo on a studio album. And he does a short drum solo. Overall, I thought that track was boring. I didn't think it was a bad album. I listened to it as something where much better things were going to come, starting with the next album. You know, I think as a band, that's great, Anthony. That's awesome. You know, as a band, you just hear them improving, you know, they were progressing and, you know, no pun intended. And yeah, not a bad album. I'll tell you what was for that early period of Rush, I'll tell you it was a much better album. It was done by another Canadian band called The Spirit of Christmas. And the album is called Lies to Live By. And there's a lot of similarities between what they were doing in 1973 and 1974 and what Rush was doing. And in fact, in my opinion, Rush was directly influenced by Christmas. And you could maybe Pete could ask Martin, because I think Martin would have something to say about that as well.
Spirit of Christmas is the name of the band?
Well, they were originally they were the Spirit of Christmas, then they became Christmas. And then their last album that came out in 1974 was called The Spirit of Christmas. Yeah, it was the very first album I reissued. It was LE1001, LE1001. And it's a classic progressive hard rock album. If you can imagine like 2112 mixed with Gentle Giant.
Wow. I'll have to be looking that up.
It's one of the best Canadian progressive rock albums. And there's, you know, I used to talk to the guys in Christmas about it. And they used to go see Rush play in the clubs and he used to sit there and throw peanuts at him on, So, I think they were kind of aware of one another. When you hear The Spirit of Christmas, first I think it'll totally blow you away. I love the Rickenbacker on it. And also you'll definitely hear a musical connection between what they were doing and what Rush was doing. And they were doing it much better. But having said that, I think, Rush clearly evolved into something special. For me, the magic really started with 2112, but I didn't think Caress of Steel was bad.
Cool. Okay.
Is that a fair assessment from a novice?
Yeah, I think so. All right, my take on this, and I guess we lost Steven. Maybe he lost power or something like that. It's weird.
Well,
yeah. I've always liked Caress of Steel. Now, I've been listening to Rush for a long time, and while I don't think Caress of Steel is the out and out classic that, Hemispheres and even maybe 2112 and, all the other albums that we always talk about from the 70s from them. I think it's a little misunderstood. And, you listen to and you read interviews with the band and they don't talk too highly of this album. They're like, yeah, that album was kind of a mistake and blah, blah, blah. And we know what the record company thought. And, George mentioned before, you see people on forums and in chats and comment sections, and you get people who either, they tear it apart or they express their love for it. But, sometimes I see people who talk badly about Caress of Steel, and yet they claim all their favorite Rush albums are like Power Windows and Hold Your Fire. So they obviously came on board with Rush at a different time, right? And this is night and day from Power Windows, Hold Your Fire, that sort of thing. So I guess if you really prefer Rush from that era, this might be really kind of, hard on the ears. But that being said, it's not that much different than Fly By Night, I don't think. I think this is exactly as a couple of you said, this is the transition album to 2112. I think 2112 has some better written songs for sure, especially the arrangements. But, man, Bastille Day, they played live constantly back then. They played Lakeside Park a lot live. I think I'm Going Bald is silly. I like the riffs. It's a good rock song. Lyrically, it's pretty silly. I love the Necromancer. I love the darkness of it. It's heavy. It's complex. Even with the, on this album with some of that goofy narration and stuff, I still think it's just this band just pedal to the metal, embracing their prog roots, embracing their metal roots. And I like the Fountain of Lamneth. Again, I agree. It could be a little tighter. And it does sound like pieces of things they were doing that kind of like patched together, maybe not as successful as like Close to the Edge, but so I don't know. I like this album. I think it's a little misunderstood. I think people have spent too much time listening to what the critics have always said about it. I think even the band has done the same thing, because the band heard it from the record label, from the critics, that this is a piece of shit and you got to go out and do something better that's going to make some money. And I think 2112 is basically the same blueprint, just maybe done a little bit better. And there are a lot of people who are like, oh, 2112 is so much better. That's, classic album. But are they really that much different? I don't think so. Because if you get, if you like all Rush's big, long, epic stuff, you got a lot of that on here. And it's, I don't think it's that much inferior to what came after it. So I'm going to say this is both misunderstood and underrated, I think. But again, I've been listening to it for, 40 some odd years. So maybe it's just me. But
well, all of these albums we're talking about really are transitional albums.
Yeah. Yep. Very true. Very true. Including the next one, which is King Crimson Islands. Lewis.
Oh boy. Well, I mean, look, let's talk about the positives. It has Sailor's Tale, which I think is a great piece of music. I love the Island Suite. Ladies of the Road. I don't know. In general, I don't know exactly how I would describe. I don't know what Peter Sinfield was thinking when he was doing these lyrics at the time. But it's a very strange kind of album for King Crimson, in my opinion, because it is indeed I think this is the only one that Boz Scaggs sang on, correct? This is
Burrell.
the-
Burrell.
Boz Scaggs.
Yeah,
Boz Skaggs would have been better.
That would have been awesome. That I want to hear.
yeah, Burrell. I, you know, it's not Greg Lake. It's not Wetton, right? It's certainly not Baloo and what happened later. It's very weird, you know. And compared to the other King Crimson records, this has always been not my favorite. But at the same time, because of A Sailor's Tale, I can't hate it, you know. I just what I find is that fortunately King Crimson released a lot of their concerts from the latter years and played with a big band, and I can hear those songs reinterpreted with 3 drummers and Tony Levin and a whole and then I can really hear those songs shine, right? So that helped me appreciate it better. Again, the tendency that a lot of people have, and I have it too, is that we react not to the piece of music that is being offered, but to an imaginary expectation of what we wanted them to do, right? And I think that's always very unfair, because the artist needs to do what they want to do, and hopefully we're along for the ride. But if not, that's fine. But we need to listen to what they did, not be upset that they didn't do what we wanted, right? Before we decide. So it's not my favorite. As to whether it's misunderstood, I don't really have a very clear sense of what they were going for. It is a very strange, because for example, when they did Lizards and those things, that was a very jazzy, they were still sort of exploring. I love Lizard. I think Lizard is misunderstood. People hate that record. I think it's a great record. This one, it's a little bit schizophrenic. Some of the songs are trying to be more, I guess, there's no such thing as mainstream, but they're not as angular as they would later get, but they're also trying to be a little more friendly. But at the same time, you don't have those hooks. You don't have the voices, the singers, right? So that's already a very big repellent for most people who can't get past the singer, right? Most people just hear the singer. That's all they get. That's the first impression. The music is good. It's King Crimson. It's not their best work, but it's not terrible. I don't know. I don't know if it's underrated. I don't think it's over. It certainly is not overrated. As far as, like I said, misunderstood, I guess I should just admit that I don't really understand what it was supposed to be about. I don't understand even the cover. Why is a record called Islands showing you a fucking galaxy or some, you know, I don't understand it. So I don't get it. It's a bit of a mystery to me. So I will admit that it is certainly misunderstood by me. And there are moments of music there that I don't love, but it's a little bit like with Rush. It's King Crimson. Even when King Crimson is not their best, they're still putting out quality stuff. And that's something that you just cannot take away from them, right? Their bad stuff in the big picture isn't bad. It may be a little quirky, a little weird, but it's not bad. It's not garbage, right? So I would say certainly misunderstood. Possibly, I don't know if it's overrated or underrated. I think it's properly rated. I think people buy it who want to get into the catalog, completists, but probably not too many other people. And the rest get a chance to hear their best moments in other contexts. So that's what I would say. I would say if you really want to hear the best of this record, check out the live recordings from the 2018 or so. Those are great. And those songs really shine. Whatever you may feel about, you know, the current singer in Crimson and anything is irrelevant. I mean, the band is just so much tighter, so much better rehearsed, so much better. So yeah, maybe they're not the wild improvisational creature they once were. But to be honest, I don't think I would have really liked to hear those guys improvise wildly over those songs. That's just me, right? So
Cool. Some good points. Anthony.
All right, this was released, what, 1972? This is definitely one of the ones I bought later on in my King Crimson buying. Of course, the cover may kind of lead you to believe that it might be a spacey album, but that's far from the contrary. As Luis says, Sailor's Tale Live is with the current incarnation, or since like 2014, just knocks your balls off. It's so good. And even the Letters was really good live. I don't know if Boz Burrell was the perfect vocalist. You know, we know later on he goes and joins Bad Company and they have a great vocalist and he just plays bass and shuts up. You know, the title track isn't bad. For Mental Ladies is kind of, it's a decent song, but it's very dated. So I'm going to say it's not underrated, as Luis is saying, but I think it's kind of misunderstood a little bit. We're kind of figuring out where Fripp was going here. I like Lizard. I think Lizard, the title track, is amazing, especially live. Totally different record, another transitional period, as Ken would say. I would say this is kind of misunderstood, where they were going, what Fripp was doing. I don't know if Fripp knew what he was doing, where he was going to go from there. So I'm going to go with it was misunderstood.
Okay, cool. Eric. You gonna go 3 for 3 here?
It's boring to me. So if you want to rate it, I guess I'd rate it boring. I don't find much here that, and maybe what Lewis was saying is that Fripp was kind of directionless at this point. I don't know. I don't feel like it's a cohesive album. I don't like Boz Burrell, which I'm sure most people kind of feel that way, which, like Lewis said, if you buy, but I think people who listen to Crimson too, you're listening to the music. I don't know, and I hate to say this because I know Fripp, you know, everyone, he's a great player. I listen to Sailor's Tale and it sounds like a mess on guitar. I don't know what's going on. I see the eyebrow, Ken, watch it. I don't know. I mean, I've got a few notes.
Eric, I'm about ready to hit 911.
That's what I figured.
Because I feel like my blood pressure going up. So go ahead.
The Letters is just noise. Ladies of the Road is noodling. And I know we're not trying to, this isn't, do we love it or do we hate it? But I can see where people weren't attracted to this. It kind of falls flat. It feels fairly misguided. And like I said, I just find it boring. And I'm sorry about the Fripp thing, but I don't get Sailor's Tale, at least on here. I've seen them live and maybe it's a different story, but it doesn't do anything for me. And that's kind of the whole record. It just, if anybody wants it, I got it for sale for a couple bucks. So that's how I feel. I don't have to hear this again. So I'd say it's not misunderstood, definitely not overrated, and might not be underrated enough.
All right. Eric is swimming in the suckage here today. Without actually saying it.
Without saying it, right.
All right, George, how about you?
I'll say for me it sucks. I mean, I don't like it at all. Actually, a lot less than the album I famously said I didn't care for. I think that's way better. This is not for me at all. I find no redeeming character in it. But for me, this topic is more about how other people perceive it. And I'll say I think it's unfair because, yeah, it's weird and it's different. Isn't that what King Crimson kind of about? I mean, to me, they're like a curveball band. You can't assume you know what the album's going to sound like, and this album fits that. In the midst of all that stuff, I'm not the biggest King Crimson expert, but it seems like to me that's what they're known for, is being avant, with a little odd. So if the fan base has got a beef with this album, I'm not sure. Maybe they just don't like it, but you should expect that it's not a comfortable listen. If you're saying it's boring, well, then I'm right with you, because I find it very boring. But yeah, I don't know. Overall, anything, I would say it's overrated. I looked at the ratings and it's rated pretty well. I mean, not as high as some of the others, but it's still a well-liked album. So I don't see that, but again, not my cup of tea. So that's
All right. Ken's got the serious face. What do you got to say, Ken?
Eric and George, I'm due back on planet Earth, so I'm gonna, I'll speak from there. For me, the album is a carryover from Lizard. I hear a lot of continuity from Lizard. You have Keith Tippett, you have Mel Collins, you have not quite as strong a jazz element, but it's still present on the album. The real game changer for first of all, we should go back and say what we've said before. For me, at least, there are no bad King Crimson albums. There are some that are a little less good. And if you want to say that in the catalog, this is the weakest one, okay, fine, I'll give that to you. But if you really kind of look at the history of the band, you had In the Wake of Poseidon was just a rehash of George's favorite album. Lizard was the real left turn. That's, the band had broken up. Fripp reconstitutes a new version of the band. There's a very strong jazz element. Some of those guys leave. Some of the guys carry over into Islands. I think it's a good album. I like Formentera Lady. It shows off that jazz rock influence. I think it's something that could have been on Lizard. And again, I love Lizard. Sailor's Tale, to me, sounds like a piece that could have appeared later on in the Wet and Bruford era. I thought The Letters is a very nice ballad. I had no issue with it. I also have no issue with Boz's vocals. I mean, he's not Paul Rodgers and he's not Boz Skaggs, but on this album, I thought he was okay. Ladies of the Road, I thought was kind of a fun tune. To me, it sounds like King Crimson doing the Beatles with the vocal harmonies. I thought it was good. Song of the Gulls was sort of a very interesting classical experiment. I thought Islands, the title track, I thought was a bit too long. There's some really nice Keith Tippett piano on the album. There's some nice jazz influences, which are in the writing that I think is great. And there's some really beautiful mellotron. But overall, it seems like it could have been a tune that could have been tightened up a bit. Again, not my favorite King Crimson album, but I think an absolutely fine album. Yeah, if it's getting a hate tonight, I'm not sure why, but okay.
Well, I will pretty much agree with everything Ken said. I have grown to really like this album a lot, and I will admit that early on I was kind of like, I was kind of feeling a little bit of what Eric and George were saying, a little on the boring side. It's kind of jazzy. Yeah, Boz isn't really a great singer, but he's passable. I think, to be honest with you, I really started to appreciate this album more when I started to see the current incarnation of King Crimson playing these songs live. And also in recent years, I've been getting a lot of the many live albums that have been coming out from the archives, where they have showed where you can hear this band playing these songs live back in the day. And I think most of these songs just kind of sound better on stage. And, in the hands of the current band, they sound really great. I don't know. I love Formentera Lady. I love Sailor's Tale. I love Islands. A little long, yeah. Great mellotron on this album. Nice jazzy touches. Not a great Fripp album. It's not a ton of guitar solos on here. They're on here. I dig it. I think it's really cool. It's one of those albums I think that has grown on me more and more. And I think this is fairly underrated, I think. And I agree with Ken. It's not one of their best. I don't even think it's one of their worst. I think it's kind of like right in the middle. So for me, I would say it's a little bit underrated, but I enjoy it. There you have it. All right.
It was I think a pretty strong live band. When you go back and look.
Yeah, all the live recordings I've heard are really good.
Sure, Summit Studios from Denver from 72, that radio broadcast. That's a classic.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, there's some good ones. All right, the last one for today is the last album from Gentle Giant, so called Civilian. I think out of all of our picks today, this one is less of a transition album. Well, it kind of is, because it was a transition into the 80s, but unfortunately it turned out to be the last thing they ever did, right? So Lewis, your take on Civilian, which is coming out remastered any day now, right? Something like that. You're muted.
I really, really like that album a lot. I know a lot of people love to hate it. But again, I think that during that era, when a lot of these bands were changing their sound and changing their style and trying to match expectations from the marketplace, you know, all the things that essentially guarantee that your music is going to turn to shit, right? They actually delivered an album that I genuinely enjoy. Now, is it in a glass house? No, right? But it's not intended to be, right? And that's kind of the paradox. Like if an artist keeps making the same record, people shit on them for that. But if they keep changing, then they want the same record, right? That's kind of what Pete Townshend was making fun of when he wrote that song, New Song, right? He's just making fun of the fact that people really just want him to keep writing the same old song, right? And I think I love this record. I've never understood why people slag it so bad. It's not. It's just. I mean, let me put it to you like this. I have played Gentle Giant albums to a lot of people through the years, right? Because I'm a big Gentle Giant fan. I love Gentle Giant. And my barometer, as I keep mentioning her because she's just a sweetheart and she's a nice person. Our merch lady, Mara, right? She doesn't know anything about prog, doesn't care at all, right? But I keep subjecting this poor woman to prog, and Gentle Giant in particular. And the first time she heard it, I gave her, you know, free hand, and she made a face like I had slapped her, right? And with Civilian, I just didn't tell her it was Gentle Giant. And she said, oh, that's not so bad. What is that? And when I told her it was Gentle Giant, she didn't believe it. Okay? So that's all I'm going to say. If you just follow the scientific method and let people hear the music without a label, right, you will find that people don't actually hate it, right? And it has still a lot of the complexity and a lot of all the things they learned compositionally, right, are not lost. And we were talking earlier about how, you know, Caress of Steel is clumsy, right? The guys learning the craft, they're trying to put it together, and it's not necessarily their best effort. I happen to like it, but you know, it's necessary. It's part of the growth, right? I mean, how many weird albums did Pink Floyd make before they hit on metal, right? It just goes like that sometimes. And with Gentle Giant, they already had a supremely high level of quality, right? So now they had all these chops compositionally, in addition to in their instruments, and they put them to work in their usual. They don't do epics. They were never doing epics, you know. Even their longer songs are really just put together but they were individual songs, right? And I love this record. I think it's misunderstood for sure. I don't know what people wanted them to do. I will defend it forever. I love Civilian. I think it's a great record. I don't fault it at all. It has no asterisk for me. It's an album I genuinely love, and it really irritates me when people shit on it, actually, because I don't think they're listening to the same thing I'm listening to. It's just
when you say the same thing about Elias, then?
No, because Elias is really just something you like. But yeah, I just love it, and I hope that that the remastering brings with it some extra things, maybe from
Better music.
some hypothetical vault. But I don't know. I like it. I give it a thumbs up. Misunderstood for sure. Underrated. Absolutely.
Cool.
I love Civilian.
All right. Eric. Anthony.
General Giant Civilian, 1980. It's one of the ones I don't have a physical copy of. It was one of those ones that General Giant was a band for me over the years that I kind of came late to the party. I was always kind of like, they're not bad. Oh, they kind of suck. Oh, they're great. Now I've kind of jumped on the bandwagon a little bit. In the Glass House, Freehand, fantastic records. Civilian is something I really never knew. I started listening to the last week and a half, and it kind of reminds me like Giant for the Day and The Missing Piece. Albums that are just okay, that have some really great songs, and the rest are just like with Civilian. I think the opening track, Convenience, is fantastic. I really like, as Eric said earlier, Underground. My favorite is Inside Out. It has an emotional type of feeling to it. I love the vocals. The rest of it, it's not bad. It doesn't excite me. I Am a Camera I think is terrible. But is it underrated? It could be. It's sad that they went out and they didn't keep going. They were done after 1980. But again, I kind of lump it in with the last three they did with The Missing Piece and Giant for a Day. I think Giant for a Day has a couple cool tunes on it. Same with The Missing Piece. So I'm going to say Civilian. I guess in their canon, compared to the earlier albums, it's not the greatest, but I do like 3-4 songs on it. So it's not one of the ones I would pull, but that's what I'm going to say. I'm not going to say it's underrated. I'm not going to say it's overrated. It could be misunderstood. It's definitely the label tried to want them to get hits like a poppy thing, and that's not Gentle Giant, where they were a complex band with fantastic harmonies. So I guess I'm going to leave it at that. Civilian is what it is. 1980 was their last hurrah.
It certainly was, sadly. Cool. Eric.
Well, I came to Gentle Giant differently than the other three bands we talked about. I was getting into prog when I got into college. I worked at the college radio station, and they had all the albums, and I made a lot of these. So I had all their albums at once. I hadn't heard them on the radio. I had just read about them. I knew they were a prog band, saw they had the collection of albums and taped them. So Gentle Giant's kind of one of those bands, I don't want to say I discovered on my own, but nobody was saying, play Freehand, Playing the Fool, one of the, I listened to them, I judged them, and you could tell the progression as you went through, and you started from album number 1, which had its bluesy stuff. They got more progressive, but they always did some different things. I mean, Interview had reggae, obviously Missing Piece, Forward. They were trying to maybe stay relevant. But I got to say, I know I've been nasty previously. I'm with Lewis. I love this record. I think for what it is, they're great songs. I can walk through, I can hear every song, Convenience, all through the night. I can hear them in my head. I think it's not going to be Freehand if that's the Gentle Giant you like. But on its own, I think they're cool tunes. I mean, there's a couple that are maybe so-so, but I think it stands up very well. I think the songs are really good. I like that Gary Green's a little more up front and Carrie Minier's back a little bit. You don't have a lot, and it's not as complex. You can listen to it once and you know that part of it, but I gotta say that probably 6 of the 9 songs on the record stick in my head. So I think they're catchy, and you can laugh, Ken, but
It sticks in your head like a knife.
well, not to me, and not to Lewis. And Lewis, you're going to irritate Lewis because he said whoever doesn't like it, it's going to irritate him. So I'm looking forward to your.
Ken always irritates me. It's normal.
That's
I think
my
it's
role in life.
underrated. So I'm going with underrated. And I do enjoy Civilian, and I play it fairly regularly. So
Cool. George.
This one's the easiest for me. This is 100% about fan expectations. I mean, if you want the old Gentle Giant, this isn't it. This is they went for the 80s sound, the trying for poppier stuff. The vocals are totally different. I find them a little easier to take, actually, because I sometimes have difficulty with the old melodies. So I find it a little easier to take, and I would have thought other people do also, but the problem is I don't think he's the greatest singer to begin with, and I think this music is more reliant on the vocalist. And I don't think that he has the kind of voice to carry these definitely less ornate songs. Actually, though, I don't think there's anything wrong with this record other than it's not my cup of tea. I don't like that early 80s English poppy thing, but in that pocket, I don't think there's anything wrong with this record. If you like that, a band name is not a brand name. So it doesn't have to sound like Old Gentle Giant. It just has to be something you like. With me, I don't really like this, but I don't dislike it either. And I think if the fans want a certain way and it's not that way, just go to something else. It's kind of like the Metallica thing. When they went from a metal band to a hard rock thing, you might not want to go for the ride, but I don't know. I just never shit on it like that, and I wouldn't shit on this record. So I'd say this record is maybe rated a little. I go both ways with it. It's kind of, I can see why people are frustrated with it, but at the same time, I don't think you can lock a band into a place and say you always have to sound like this. And that's kind of what underrating this does, is say, oh, it doesn't sound like the old stuff. We know that. So it's my take on it.
Good points. Good points. All right, Ken.
Well, I must be living in a bizarro world. So, I mean, this was a transitional album. I mean, from this, the band transitioned right to the unemployment line. So, you know, the band started a downward trajectory with The Missing Piece, which I actually like. You know, that was, you know, that's when punk was becoming popular and the band was sort of trying to find some kind of middle ground to be relevant. Giant for a Day, to me, was awful. I haven't listened to that record since it came out. And then Civilian was another one where I really hadn't listened to it in years, and I spent some time with it to talk about it tonight. And to me, it sounds like an attempt to appease the record label, but they just didn't know how to do it. From what I read, Derek Shulman took the band out to Los Angeles to record. So it sounds like Gentle Giant, but all the peculiarities that made Gentle Giant are gone. They're just kind of stripped clean. It's like they sanded off all the rough edges, and they came up with something that's, to me, very homogenous. It wasn't progressive enough for the hardcore prog fan, and it wasn't, you know, pop enough for the casual radio listener. It was neither fish nor fowl. I mean, there's some nice stuff on it, and you could tell it's Gentle Giant. I thought Kerry Minier was very good, but overall, I found it to be kind of generic. It's sort of like they should have changed their name. You know, the fact that they call themselves Gentle Giant, they should have called themselves Civilian. They would have called themselves Civilian. Maybe they would have gotten some air of play. There was one track that kind of jumped out at me all through the night. I thought was a pretty good tune. And yeah, I mean, it sounds like just this base level Gentle Giant, and it doesn't have the magic that I think the earlier albums have. It does, you know, the things that set Gentle Giant apart, they're gone. And I also kind of find it interesting that after this album, what did these guys really do? I mean, Derek Shulman he went into work at Atlantic Records, and, you know, where'd Gary Green go? You know, what did Kerry Minier do? You know,
I know where Gary Green went.
Where'd he go?
Played on Jobson. He put out a couple tracks on Jobson's solo album.
Yeah, there you go.
An hour plus into the show, we finally got the mention.
Ray Showman did some producing too, I think. Ken.
Yeah.
Yeah, but generally,
John
They
Weathers
didn't-
went back to Man, I think.
That's right. He played with
they
Man.
didn't really go into, they didn't go into high profile bands or
No.
anything like that. They didn't form new bands. They didn't even say, fuck the whole prog thing. Let's do a pop thing, They just kind of, obviously the whole experience left a bad taste in their mouth.
Yeah.
And, Derek obviously found success,
Yeah.
but the other guys,
But honestly, though, the few times I've had the chance to talk to them, I'm not sure if Civilian left a bad taste in their mouth as much as the fact that all the other records didn't garner them the success that peers like Jethro Tull were enjoying. I think that was part of what was very surprising for them when they came back in the late 90s and early 2000s, that there was all this interest in their music, and then they were genuinely surprised. I mean, I remember talking to Kerry Minier in Montreal, and he was just, stunned when he did Think of Me with Kindness, and everybody in the room stood and they just wouldn't stop applauding. He was moved to tears, and it's just I remember explaining to the guy, I said, you don't understand. I mean, I got In a Glass House a bootleg cassette from some shady bastard in a subway station in Mexico City. That's how I discovered your music. And it's always been an important part of who I am. It's difficult to measure the impact based only on the receipts, And I think that they were too much focused on that, and nobody really gave them their due until much later.
but Louis,
So-
they were a niche band in a niche genre. So, that's just the reality. I mean, they were a great band, but they never achieved the notoriety of their contemporaries, the Yeses and,
I spoke to Derek quite a few times over the years, and I've always asked him a lot of these questions and things we're talking about. And he basically said exactly what you said, that they never really achieved the success they would hope that they would get when they were doing the really challenging music. So then when the labels were kind of hitting them over the head saying, you guys got to write some material that, might be played on the radio that's a little more accessible, they're like, all right, we'll do that. Right. It's not really what we want to do, but we'll do it, thinking maybe now we'll finally make it. And that didn't work either. And, Derek was telling me in the end, we put Civilian out, and it wasn't so much that record. It was just like, we just decided this isn't us. Making this kind of music is not really what we do. So we're not ready to go into the 80s with us being who we are. So we might as well just stop. And, my point on Civilian, and I agree, I think it was Ken who said it, Giant for a Day is terrible. I don't really find anything redeemable about that album. I don't mind The Missing Piece at all. I think that's pretty good. I like this, actually. And one of the things I like about this album, and I think, and I told this to Derek himself, is that you had a lot of these bands, these prog bands who were big in the 70s, who were looking to transition into the 80s amidst all this changing music and knowing they got to do something different, right? So who did make the change, right? So Rush made the change in a big way, right? Moving Pictures, Permanent Waves, boom, they're bigger than ever. Genesis completely changed their sound, became bigger than ever. Yes did 90125, became bigger than ever. Maybe opened themselves up to another audience, right? Camel did it. They released all these kind of pop albums. They kept doing it. People bought it a little bit, right? I wouldn't say they were that successful, but they did it. A lot of the bands fell by the wayside, Van de Graaff's and whatnot. ELP fell by the wayside, right? This album to me sounds like a band that has transitioned to the 80s. It's Gentle Giant for the 80s. It's catchy, it's accessible, it's got some great music on it, good songs, but the band themselves weren't comfortable with it. Radio was never going to play it. The label wasn't going to push it. So they were just kind of like, fuck it, we're done. And it's a shame, because I think this album does what Moving Pictures did, does what 90125 did, hell, did what Abacab did, and whatever else. Jethro Tull as well moved into the 80s just fine. So I think it was for me, it's a success. I think it's misunderstood and underrated, but with the bands, it was the breaking point for them, unfortunately. And they just realized that, yeah, this isn't really who we are, so we're not going to bother anymore.
Pete, would you put that album on the same level as Moving Pictures?
No, but my point is that I think that this album puts them into the 80s in a pretty good light, because it's pretty good. It's a big difference from what they did in the past, and yeah, you're not going to compare this to their great albums.
And obviously, the record label didn't believe in it.
No,
because they didn't push it. They didn't try and push it at all.
No, but there's very catchy songs on here.
Yeah.
You mentioned All Through the Night. Number One is great. Underground, Convenience. I think it's a really fun.
I never understood that either. I think this could have been a precursor for the next era of the band.
That's my point. Yeah.
I think they could have. I'm absolutely agreeing with you. I think that they had it, and these songs are catchy, right? They're not garbage. They're not disposable pop. They were bringing yet again something unique to the table, right? Not the old stuff, but they put to work all the stuff they learned all those years with all that massive masterclass and counterpoint that's their whole career, right?
Yeah.
And then they decided to try to build something new, right? But they were just too heartbroken, and we can certainly disagree. We cannot disagree with the numbers and the perception of the success of that experiment, but it really is kind of heartbreaking, because I've always thought that they could have done very well for themselves if they had just maintained that course and just perfected that a little bit more. They could have finally, but they had enough, and people have to live their life, and I understand that. But that's why it irritates me that people always, they like the fans. I'm not talking people in general. The fans, the Gentle Giant fans, tend to slag that record, and I think that that's just not. There's nothing there that makes me understand that criticism. It's not the old stuff for sure.
It's a legitimate record, Luis. It's a legitimate attempt. They made a legitimate attempt to make a Gentle Giant record that was listener friendly. I mean, I give them that. But for me, as a Gentle Giant fan and a progressive rock fan, they kind of lost me, because the magic elixir wasn't there. The secret ingredient wasn't there.
It's not as unique a listen as Octopus and Power and the Glory, and I get that. But I think for a lot of people, when Giant for a Day came out, that wall went up, and this album comes out on the other side of the wall, and people are not willing to climb over it to take a look. Right? It happens.
I mean, what would have happened had Giant for a Day never happened, and this happens instead?
Right, because the missing piece was looked down pretty favorably.
Yeah. So if they had just not bothered with Giant for a Day, which I agree with you, Pete, that is the one thing. I had never heard it before. I discovered it thanks to your channel.
The Missing Piece is really an album that should get some scrutiny, because for me, The Missing Piece was that transitional album that still appealed to Gentle Giant fans, because it gave them a lot of what they wanted, but then it also had some, more radio friendly music on it.
But
Eric, do you agree with me, Eric?
I like Missing Piece.
You agree with me?
Absolutely. And I think like Memories of Old Days is fantastic.
I love that.
But I like the pop stuff too. Bet You Thought We Couldn't Do It, Turning Around. I like that record.
Like Turning Around in New York got a lot of airplay.
Really?
Yeah.
NEW
played all the time. That was a good tune. There's a lot of good tunes on that album.
I think it's a great record. And it's really different from Interview. I mean, I know you're saying transitional, but even Interview is a little different. Maybe we had a little more reggae or whatever, but Missing Piece is a big turn from interview
Yeah.
as well.
I mean,
I'm
the
just saying,
longest,
Giant for a Day was horrible.
yeah,
And had they just not done that and instead done this, I think that would have really helped them. But when you're already on a, not very solid footing, and then out comes an album like Giant for a Day, now you're in really big trouble, right?
but like, just to jump back to what I was saying, like the missing piece, one could assume that there was a directive in 1977 to make something that was a little bit more radio friendly. I think they came up with a really good balance. And I don't know how successful that album was, but if they would have stayed on that trajectory, I think that perhaps, it could have evolved into something that was more successful, and maybe Civilian would have been that record. But it seemed, yeah, as you said, Giant for a Day was the giant killer.
Yeah.
And but yeah, like I said, Missing Piece to me, that's kind of the overlooked or misunderstood album, or whatever you want to say, because I think they did find the right formula on that record. And if they would have just stayed the course, perhaps something would have happened for them where it would have carried over into the 80s.
Missing Piece to me was their Duke. And I think and Duke had 2 singles that were pushed to the moon, which helped elevate that album, because that album's pretty proggy still. And
sure.
I think the Missing Piece had those couple of little singles on there that the record label just didn't do jack shit with, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Good point. A lot of good points tonight. This was, I think, a really fascinating discussion. And we've got 4 more to take a look at on next week's show. So those of you who are kind of hoping we might talk about, Jethro Tull and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Pink Floyd, that's coming up next week. So stay tuned for that. Same format. So same bat time, same bat channel. So thanks for watching, everybody. And list your comments down below on what you think of some of these albums here. Are they misunderstood? Do they suck? Are they underrated? Whatever. And make sure you visit us on the web also at www.seatranquility.org. Check us out on Facebook, and make sure you come back and join us here on YouTube, because we are here all together all the damn time. What else we got going on? Lots of stuff happening. Make sure you tune in if you missed this month's edition of 4 Fusion Friday. That happened just last week, so go back and check that out. That's every month. Please hop on over to lasercd.com. A lot of great stuff for sale over there. A lot of great music. A lot of the music we talk about you can find on Ken's website. So yeah, there we have it, everybody. So please subscribe if you haven't already, and click on that notification bell. And for Louis Nasser, Anthony Ferrara, Eric Porter, George Lemmy, and Ken Golden, I am Pete Pardo. We'll see you next Tuesday here on In the Prog Seat with part 2 of this discussion on criminally underrated, misunderstood, or do these albums just suck? I am Pete Pardo. Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.